The memorial wall stood silent in the November cold, black granite reflecting the gray Texas sky. Captain Benjamin Hawkins pressed his fingertips against the engraved letters, tracing the name he had touched 1,000 times before. Colonel Jack Hawkins, 1963 to 991. Killed in action, 73 Easting, Iraq. 28 years old when he died. Ben was 45 now, 17 years older than his father would ever be. The absurdity of that math had haunted him for decades. Behind him, footsteps crunched on frost-covered grass. Ben did not turn. He knew the cadence of those boots, the particular rhythm of a young man trying to walk like a soldier but not quite achieving it yet. Sergeant Jake Hawkins stopped 3 paces back. His dress uniform was crisp, his posture parade ground perfect. But his voice carried that edge of forced formality that children use with parents they no longer know how to talk to. "You coming to the ceremony, sir?" Ben let his hand fall from the cold stone. "Don't call me sir off duty, Jake. Hard not to. You're my commanding officer. I'm your father first." Jake said nothing. The silence between them stretched like the years of distance, like the ghost of a grandfather neither of them really knew standing between them. Jack Hawkins had been dead for 34 years. Jake had never met him. Ben barely remembered him. Yet somehow the old man's shadow fell across both their lives like a monument neither could climb out from under. A woman's voice cut through the cold. Sarah Hawkins moved between them with the practiced ease of someone who had spent 20 years mediating between stubborn men. She touched Ben's arm, then Jake's shoulder, a bridge between generations. "You two need to talk, really talk." "We talk." Ben's voice was flat. "No, you give orders. He obeys. That's not talking." Jake turned away, his jaw tight. Ben watched his son walk toward the parking lot, watched the stiffness in his shoulders, the wounded pride in every step. Sarah sighed, the sound of a woman who had fought this battle too many times. "He thinks you don't trust him, that you don't believe he can be like Jack." Ben looked back at the memorial whistle, at his father's name carved in stone. "I don't want him to be like Jack. Jack died." But Jake doesn't know the full story, does he? The words hung between them like an accusation. Ben said nothing. Some truths were too heavy to speak aloud. Some stories were written in blood and smoke, in the screams of burning men, and you did not share those stories with your son, not if you loved him, not if you wanted him to sleep at night. Sarah squeezed his arm once, then followed Jake toward the parking lot, leaving Ben alone with his ghosts. The memorial ceremony was everything these ceremonies always were. Old men in outdated uniforms, speeches about valor and sacrifice, the national anthem played by a high school band that rushed the tempo. Ben stood at attention, hand over heart, thinking about all the ways the living failed to honor the dead. Afterward, he drove alone to Fort Hood. The tank depot sprawled across the Texas prairie like a steel graveyard, row after row of M1 Abrams tanks parked in perfect formation. These were not museum pieces. These were working war machines, 70 tons of composite armor and turbine engines, the most lethal tanks ever built. Ben had commanded them for 23 years. His father had commanded their predecessors. His office was small, functional, decorated only with what mattered. A map of Iraq circa 1991, a photograph of his platoon from his first deployment, and on the wall behind his desk, a larger photo in a black frame. Colonel Jack Hawkins at his Medal of Honor ceremony, posthumous, his widow accepting the blue ribbon and star, while their 11-year-old son stood beside her in an oversized suit, trying not to cry. Ben had been that boy. He barely recognized himself now. He opened the steel locker beside his desk. Standard issue, government gray, scarred from decades of use. Inside, wrapped in plastic like a relic, was a leather-bound journal. Ben had carried this journal from base to base, from deployment to deployment, for 27 years. He had never opened it. The journal had arrived on his 18th birthday, delivered by Sergeant Major Tom Garrett, his father's closest friend. Tom had pressed it into Ben's hands with ceremony, with reverence, as if passing down sacred scripture. "Your father wanted you to have this. Read it when you're ready." Ben had never been ready. He touched the plastic now, felt the texture of old leather beneath. What if he was disappointed in me before he even knew me? The thought had paralyzed him for decades. What if he opened this journal and discovered his father's disappointment preserved in ink? What if Jack Hawkins had written down his hopes for a son who would never measure up? Better not to know. Better to leave the dead in peace and the living in doubt. He closed the locker without opening the journal. The briefing room filled quickly. 43 tank commanders, the Corps of 2nd Battalion, 42nd Armored Regiment. These were not parade ground soldiers. These were men who knew the smell of cordite and diesel fuel, who could read terrain like scripture, who had seen friends die and kept fighting. Ben respected every one of them. Major Rachel Kim stood at the front of the room, projector casting satellite images onto the wall behind her. She was 38, Korean-American, brilliant, with a mind that could piece together intelligence like a jigsaw puzzle, while everyone else was still looking for the box. She had warned about threats before. She had been right more often than command liked to admit. "Gentlemen," her voice cut through the murmur of conversation, "we have a situation." The satellite image showed the Alaskan coast, the vast emptiness of tundra and mountains stretching toward the horizon. Red markers clustered near the border, hundreds of them, spreading like a rash across the map. Satellite reconnaissance detected massive armor concentration near the Alaskan border. 900 T-90 main battle tanks, T-14 armadas, mobile artillery. This is not an exercise. The room went silent. Colonel Hayes stood into the back, arms crossed. He was 55, career staff officer, a man who had spent more time in Pentagon briefing rooms than tank turrets. His voice dripped with the condescension of someone who confused rank with wisdom. "Major Kim, the Russians have conducted border exercises before. This is posturing, nothing more. Sir, not at this scale. They are removing camouflage netting, refueling, loading ammunition. These are combat preparations." Hayes waved a dismissive hand. "Stand down, Major. I will not authorize full deployment based on speculation." Ben stood slowly. His voice was quiet, but it carried. "Sir, if Major Kim is right and we do nothing, we could lose Alaska before we mobilize." Hayes turned on him, eyes cold. "Captain Hawkins, I understand you feel pressure to live up to your father's reputation. But do not let that pressure cloud your judgment." Colonel Jack Hawkins had the courage to act decisively. Learn from that. The room seemed to hold its breath. Every man there understood what Hayes had just said. Every man there knew the implication. You are not your father. You will never be your father. Stop trying. Ben's jaw tightened, but he said nothing. He sat back down, feeling the weight of every eye in the room, feeling the ghost of Jack Hawkins standing over his shoulder. Judging, always judging. After the briefing, Rachel Kim caught him in the hallway. Her face was tight with frustration. "He's wrong, Ben. I know he's wrong. Probably. But he's a colonel and we're not. We follow orders." She handed him a folder, classified material in a red cover. "Then follow orders. But read this first, just in case." Ben took the folder. Inside were detailed satellite images, troop movements, logistics reports. The kind of intelligence that painted a picture no one wanted to see. He flipped through the pages, feeling cold certainty settle in his chest. "How long do we have? If they move, 48 hours until they cross the border. Maybe less. And how long until we can deploy?" Hayes authorized minimal readiness. "If he changes his mind tomorrow, we could be airborne in 72 hours. If he waits until they attack, it could be a week. By then it's too late." Rachel nodded. "By then Alaska falls and we are fighting on American soil, unless someone convinces Hayes otherwise." She left him standing in the hallway, holding the folder, feeling the weight of knowledge that no one wanted to hear. It was a familiar feeling. His father had probably felt this too, standing in some Iraqi briefing room, knowing what was coming, unable to stop it. That evening, Ben sat in his quarters, the classified folder open on his desk. Sarah called. Her voice was warm, concerned, the voice of a woman who had loved him through 2 decades of deployments and doubt. "Jake wants to come visit you tomorrow, before you ship out." "We are not shipping out." Hayes canceled deployment. "Ben," Sarah's voice sharpened, "talk to your son. Really talk to him, before it's too late." "Too late for what?" She did not answer directly. He asked about his grandfather, about 73 Easting, about what really happened. "I have told him what happened. His grandfather was a hero. He died saving his men. That's the official story. That's not the truth." Ben closed his eyes. Sarah knew. She had always known. She was a VA nurse. She had heard the stories that veterans told in the dark hours, the stories that never made it into medal citations. The truth would not help him, Sarah. The truth might save him. "Good night, Ben. I love you." She hung up before he could answer. Ben sat in silence, staring at the classified folder, thinking about truths and lies in the stories fathers tell their sons. Eventually he stood, crossed to the steel locker, and looked at the plastic-wrapped journal inside. Not tonight. Maybe never. Some ghosts were better left undisturbed. The alert came at 0200 hours. Ben's phone screamed into the darkness. The emergency tone that meant the world had changed while you slept. He grabbed it before the second ring, already swinging his legs out of bed, already reaching for his boots. Rachel Kim's voice was tight, professional, barely controlled panic underneath. Ben, get to the operations center. Now, all satellite communications are down, complete blackout. Cyber attack? That's the theory. And there's more. Listen, she held the phone towards something. Through the static and distance, Ben heard it. A low rumble, like thunder that did not stop, like an earthquake that kept coming. Artillery, distant but getting closer. He was dressed and running before she spoke again. The operations center was chaos. Officers shouting into dead radios, computer screens flickering with error messages. Colonel Hayes stood at the center of the storm, face pale, hands shaking as he held a field telephone, the only communication link still functioning. Hayes saw Ben and something cracked in his expression, some rigid certainty that had defined his entire career. They're coming. His voice was hollow. 900 tanks, maybe more. They hit our forward positions 20 minutes ago. We are blind, Hawkins. No satellites, no drones, no communications beyond line of sight. Ben felt an odd calm settle over him, the calm that comes when the thing you feared finally arrives. What are your orders, sir? Hayes looked at him. For a moment, the older man's mask slipped completely. He looked old, terrified, a desk officer suddenly facing the war he had spent his career avoiding. Get your battalion to Alaska. Now. Everything we have. Every tank that can roll. You leave in 4 hours. Ben saluted. Yes, sir, then gentler. We will stop them, sir. Hayes nodded but did not look convinced. The tank depot exploded into motion, floodlights blazing in the darkness, engines roaring to life, crews running, loading ammunition, checking systems, moving with the desperate speed of men who knew they were already behind. Ben moved through the organized chaos, calling orders, checking readiness, being everywhere at once. He found Jake at Ghost 6, their assigned M1A2 Abrams tank. The boy was checking the main gun, face set in concentration. Beside him, Corporal Chen loaded ammunition, stacking the long sabot rounds in their ready rack. In the driver's compartment, Specialist Harris was running diagnostics, his young face illuminated by screens. Jake looked up as Ben approached. His voice was steady, professional. Ghost 6 is mission capable, sir. Full ammunition load. All systems green. Good. Ben paused, searching for words that did not come naturally. Jake, about yesterday. His son cut him off. We are good, sir. Let's focus on the mission. Ben wanted to say more, wanted to bridge the gap that had widened over years. But the moment passed as Sergeant Major Tom Garrett appeared, 62 years old and tough of his boot leather, carrying his gear like a man half his age. Tom had been Jack Hawkins' gunner at 73 Easting. He had been there when Jack died. He had spent the last 34 years trying to pay back a debt he could never repay, mentoring Ben, protecting him, carrying the weight of survival that should have been Jack's. Now he climbed into Ghost 6's loader position, settling in with the easy grace of a man who had done this 1,000 times. Just like old times, Captain. Tom's voice was gravel and humor. Your daddy and I ran drills at 0300. Guess it runs in the family. Ben managed a smile. Glad you are here, Tom. Nowhere else I would rather be. Tom paused, his scarred hands gentle on the ammunition. Ben, before we roll out, there's something I need to tell you. About your father. Not now, Tom. Ben, listen, you need to know how he really died. I said not now. Ben's voice had an edge. We have a mission. That's all that matters. Tom studied him for a long moment, then nodded slowly. Yes, sir. But after this is over, we are having that conversation. No more running from ghosts. The C-17 Globemasters began loading at 0400. Tank after tank rolled up the ramps, securing themselves in the cargo bay with chains and tie-downs. 85 1A2 Abrams tanks, 4,000 tons of steel and firepower. The entire deployable strength of 2nd Battalion. Everything. Ben stood on the tarmac, watching his command load, thinking about impossible mathematics. 85 tanks against 900. 10-to-1 odds, worse than his father had faced at 73 Easting. His father had won with 4-to-1 odds. His father had also died. Major Kim approached with a Tupolev showing thermal satellite imagery from before the blackout. The red symbols of enemy forces clustered like cancer cells. Last intel, before we lost the satellites. They are moving fast, Ben. Estimate they will reach our forward positions in Alaska within 12 hours. You will have maybe 6 hours to dig in before contact. Terrain? Similar to a rocky desert in some ways. Flat tundra, mountain ridges, limited cover. They will have the same advantages the Iraqis had at 73 Easting. Numbers and momentum. Then we better have what my father had, skill and stubbornness. Rachel smiled, but it did not reach her eyes. Your father's diary, did you ever read it? The question hit Ben like a physical blow. How do you know about that? Tom told me, years ago. He said Jack wrote down everything he learned, every tactic, every lesson. He said it could save lives someday. Ben looked away. I never read it. Maybe you should, before it's too late. She walked away, leaving him alone with his thoughts and his ghosts. The first C-17 began taxiing toward the runway, engines screaming, carrying 20 tanks north to war. Ben watched it climb into the pre-dawn darkness, then turned toward his own transport. Ghost 6 was secured in the third aircraft. Ben climbed aboard, moving through the cramped space to where Jake sat in the gunner's position, running final checks on the fire control system. The boy looked up, and for just a moment, Ben saw Jack's face superimposed over his son's. The same determined jaw, the same eyes that saw too much. You scared? Ben asked quietly. Jake hesitated, then nodded, terrified. Good. Fear keeps you sharp, keeps you alive. Is that what Grandpa Jack believed? Ben paused. I don't know what your grandfather believed. I was 11 when he died. I barely knew him. But you have his journal. Jake's voice was careful. Mom told me. She said he wrote it for you. I never read it. Why not? The question hung between them. Ben could not answer, could not explain the paralysis, the fear of disappointment, the weight of a legacy he had spent his entire life running from. Finally, he just shook his head. Some things are better left in the past. Jake looked at him with something like pity. That's why you are afraid to let me fight. Not because you think I am not ready, because you are afraid I will die like he did. Ben felt the words like a knife. Maybe. His son reached out, touched his arm. The first voluntary physical contact in months. Dad, I am not him. You are not him. We are our own men. Let's prove it. Before Ben could respond, the C-17's engines roared to life. The aircraft shuddered, began moving, and the moment was lost in noise and motion. Ben climbed into the tank commander's position, settling into the familiar confines of the turret, and tried not to think about fathers and sons and the chains that bound them across decades. The flight north took 6 hours. Ben tried to sleep but could not. His mind kept returning to the steel locker in his office, to the journal wrapped in plastic, to all the words his father had written that he had never read. What tactical wisdom had Jack recorded? What lessons learned in blood? What final messages for a son he would never know? Around him, the C-17's cargo bay thrummed with engine noise. Jake dozed in the gunner's seat, face slack with exhausted youth. Tom Garrett sat in the loader's position, methodically cleaning his sidearm, the ritual of old soldiers before combat. Harris, the driver, listened to music through headphones, eyes closed. They looked so young. They were so young. Tom was the only one old enough to have served with Jack. The rest were children, playing at being warriors, and Ben was supposed to lead them into a meat grinder. He pulled out the folder Rachel had given him, studied the satellite images, analyzed terrain, calculated firing positions in kill zones and retreat routes. This was what he knew. This was what he was good at. Not emotional conversations with estranged sons, not confronting the ghosts of dead fathers, just math and tactics in the cold calculus of war. The C-17 began its descent. Through the small window, Ben saw Alaska spreading below. Vast, empty, beautiful and terrible. The forward operating base was a raw wound in the tundra, hastily constructed, insufficient for what was coming. The landing was rough. The aircraft touched down hard, bounced, settled. The rear ramp dropped and Arctic air flooded in, so cold it burned. Ben keyed his radio. All ghost elements, prepare to offload. Combat spacing. We are in Indian country now. The tanks rolled off one by one, tracks clanking on metal ramps, engines bellowing. Ghost 6 hit the frozen ground and Ben scanned the horizon through his optics. Mountains to the east, flat tundra stretching north. And somewhere out there, beyond visual range, 900 Russian tanks moving like a steel avalanche. The base commander met them at the motor pool. Lieutenant Colonel Marcus Webb, 50 years old, West Point graduate, 2 tours in Afghanistan, face like carved granite. He looked at Ben's 85 tanks with something between relief and despair. "You are all they sent?" "All they had." Ben climbed down from Ghost 6. "What's our situation?" Webb pointed north. "Enemy forces approximately 50 kilometers out and closing. We have 800 infantry, 15 artillery pieces, and now your tanks. Against what intelligence estimates is a full mechanized division. Maybe more." "Terrain?" "There's a ridge line 30 kilometers north. Mesa Ridge. Good firing position, excellent observation. If we can hold that, we can see them coming from 10,000 meters out. And if we cannot hold it, then they roll right over us and Anchorage falls in 48 hours. Webb's voice was flat. "This is not a delaying action, Captain. This is the line. We hold or we die." Ben looked at the mountains, at the endless tundra, at the sky already darkening toward evening. He thought about his father at 73 Easting, facing impossible odds. He thought about Jake sleeping in the gunner's seat, trusting his father to bring him home. "Then we hold." The battalion moved out at 1800 hours. 85 tanks in tactical formation, spread across 3 kilometers of frozen ground, moving north toward Mesa Ridge. The sun was setting, painting the snow orange and red, beautiful and ominous. Ben rode in the tank commander's hatch, exposed to the cold, needing to see with his own eyes. Jake's voice came through the intercom. "Thermal imaging shows clear horizon, no contacts. Keep scanning. They are out there." Tom Garrett's voice, older, steadier. "Just like Iraq, Ben. Desert and snow are not that different. Flat ground, long sight lines. Your daddy knew how to fight in this terrain." Ben did not answer. He was thinking about the journal, about all the unread wisdom locked in his office safe 3,000 miles away. Too late now. Whatever lessons Jack had learned, whatever tactics he had written down, they were out of reach. Ben would have to fight this battle with his own knowledge, his own instincts, his own mistakes. Ghost 6 crested a small rise and suddenly Mesa Ridge spread before them. A natural fortress, a long escarpment of rock and ice rising 50 meters above the tundra, stretching east to west for 10 kilometers. Perfect defensive terrain. Ben could already see the firing positions, the covered approaches, the kill zones where an advancing enemy would be exposed and vulnerable. This was where they would make their stand. The battalion deployed along the ridge in textbook formation. Hold down positions, only the turrets exposed, maximum protection while maintaining fields of fire. Ben positioned Ghost 6 on the center of the line, command position, where he could see and coordinate the entire defense. As the sun touched the horizon, Jake spoke quietly from the gunner's position. "Dad, I am really scared now." Ben looked down through the turret, saw his son's face illuminated by the green glow of the thermal sight. "So am I, Jake. So am I." "You are not supposed to say that. You are supposed to tell me it will be okay. I could lie to you, but you deserve the truth. We are outnumbered 10 to 1. Most of us probably will not survive tomorrow. But we are going to fight anyway, because that is what soldiers do. That's what men do. We stand when running would be easier." Jake nodded slowly, like Grandpa Jack. "Yeah, like Grandpa Jack." The words hung between them. Ben wanted to say more, wanted to explain about fear and duty and the weight of legacy. But darkness was falling fast, and in the darkness, things moved. "Ghost Actual, this is Reaper 2, Tom's voice. "Urgent. I have thermal contacts. Northern horizon, multiple vehicles. Many vehicles." Ben swung his optics north. At first he saw nothing, then slowly heat signatures resolved out of the darkness. Dozens, hundreds. A line of glowing shapes stretching from horizon to horizon, advancing like a burning wave. "All stations, Ghost Actual. We have contact, enemy armor, 10,000 meters and closing. Prepare to engage at 5,000 meters. Weapons tight until my command." The Russian tanks came on steadily, inexorably. At 8,000 meters, Ben could identify types. T-90s mostly, the backbone of Russian armor. But mixed in were larger shapes, T-14 Armadas, the latest generation, tanks he had only seen in intelligence briefings. His throat was dry, his heart hammered. This was real, this was happening. Somewhere to his left, a young gunner whispered a prayer. To his right, someone vomited from fear. Ben understood both reactions. At 6,000 meters, his radio crackled. A voice speaking English with a Russian accent, calm and cultured. American commander. This is Colonel Alexei Volkov, 4th Guards Tank Army. I have 900 tanks. You have perhaps 100. This is not a fair fight. I offer you the opportunity to withdraw. No shame, you fought bravely at 73 Easting. Your father would understand. Ben's hand tightened on the radio. How do you know my father? My father was at 73 Easting. Tier 72, number 43. Your father killed him. I have studied that battle my entire life. I know everything about Colonel Jack Hawkins. And I know you, Captain Benjamin Hawkins, cannot win here. Ben looked at his son in the gunner's seat, looked at Tom Garrett in the loader's position, looked at the 85 tanks spread along Mesa Ridge, at the young men who trusted him to lead them. Colonel Volkov, my father did not surrender at 73 Easting. Neither will I. If you want this ridge, come take it. So be it. I will remember you with respect. The radio went silent. Jake's voice was shaking. Dad, we are really doing this. Ben reached down, squeezed his son's shoulder. We are really doing this. Gunner, target tank, 5,000 meters. Jake's hands moved across his controls with practiced precision. Target acquired. All stations, stand by. Ben's voice carried across the battalion net, steady despite the terror in his chest. At 5,000 meters, we show them what American tankers can do. We show them what it means to face the sons of 73 Easting. Hold your fire, hold, hold. The Russian tanks rolled closer. 4,500 meters, 4,000, 3,500. At 3,000 meters, they were close enough that Ben could see individual details through his optics. Close enough to count turrets. Close enough to die. All stations, fire. 85 1A2 Abrams tanks fired as one. The sound was apocalyptic, a thunder that shook the ridge and rolled across the frozen tundra like the voice of God. Sabot rounds streaked downrange at a mile per second, depleted uranium penetrators designed to punch through any armor on Earth. 81 Russian tanks exploded simultaneously. One moment they were moving, vital, dangerous. The next they were funeral pyres, flames reaching toward the darkening sky, secondary explosions as ammunition cooked off. But 900 minus 81 still left more than 800, and they kept coming. Reload, Ben ordered. Target next wave. Jake's hands flew. Target acquired. Fire. Another volley. Another 79 kills. The Russian formation wavered but did not break. They were professionals. They had expected losses. They kept advancing, and now they were within their own range. The first Russian round screamed past Ghost 6 close enough that Ben felt the pressure wave. Tom Garrett ducked instinctively. Harris, in the driver's compartment, swore continuously. Return fire at will, Ben commanded. All stations engaged targets of opportunity. The battle dissolved into chaos. Individual tank commanders picking targets, firing, moving, firing again. The night lit up with muzzle flashes and burning vehicles. Thermal imagery turned the world into a hellscape of heat and death. Jake was firing methodically, professionally, calling out each kill. Splash 1, reloading. Splash 2, reloading. His voice held no emotion. He had become the machine the Army had trained him to be. Ben coordinated the defense, calling targets, repositioning tanks, trying to maintain some semblance of order in the chaos. But the Russians were adapting. They had identified the American positions. Artillery began falling on Mesa Ridge, heavy shells that threw up geysers of frozen earth and shrapnel. Ghost 7 took a direct hit. The tank simply ceased to exist, replaced by a crater and debris. 4 men Ben had known, had trained with, had shared meals with, gone. Then Ghost 11, then Ghost 23. The Russians were finding their range. All stations, prepare to reposition. We cannot stay static. Ben's mind raced, trying to remember his father's tactics, trying to channel wisdom he had never absorbed. Tom, did my father move positions at 73 Easting? Constantly. Tom was loading ammunition, his movements smooth despite the chaos. Every 3 or 4 shots, we would displace 200 meters. Made it hell for the Iraqis to predict where we would be. Ben keyed the battalion net. All odd-numbered elements displaced 200 meters east. Even elements holding cover. On my mark. 3, 2, 1, mark. 42 tanks surged backward, dropped into new firing positions, resumed shooting. The Russians, caught off guard, wasted precious seconds reacquiring targets. In those seconds, American tanks killed another 30. But it was not enough. The Russian wave kept coming, kept dying, kept coming. Numbers had their own terrible logic. By midnight, Ben had lost 23 tanks. The Russians had lost perhaps 300. The math was not in America's favor. Jake's voice came through the intercom, tight with exhaustion. "Dad, we are down to 20 rounds. At this rate, we will be Winchester in 30 minutes. Ben did arithmetic in his head. 30 minutes of ammunition against 500 Russian tanks still combat capable. After that, it would be hand-to-hand, crews fighting with sidearms and desperation. That was not a battle they could win. His radio crackled. Major Kim's voice, staticky, distant. "Ghost Actual. This is Kodiak Base. Ammunition convoy en route, ETA 45 minutes. Can you hold?" Ben looked at the sea of thermal signatures advancing toward his position, looked at his exhausted crews, looked at his son, face streaked with sweat and cordite residue, still firing mechanically. "We will hold." He had no idea if that was true. The next 30 minutes were the longest of Ben's life. Ammunition dwindled. Tanks died. The Russian advance slowed but never stopped. They had lost perhaps half their force, but that still left them with overwhelming superiority. At 0030 hours, with Ghost 6 down to 7 rounds of main gun ammunition, the Russians did something unexpected. They stopped, simply stopped advancing 2,000 meters from Mesa Ridge, and sat there, engines idling, waiting. Tom Garrett's voice was puzzled. What are they doing? Ben scanned the thermal imagery, looking for the trap. Then he saw it. In the rear of the Russian formation, larger vehicles were moving forward. Not tanks, something else. "Jake, magnify Sector 8. The image resolved. Bridge-laying vehicles, engineering equipment, and behind them a second wave of armor. Fresh tanks, perhaps 200 more, moving up to replace losses. They are not stopping. They are regrouping for a night assault." Ben's voice was hollow. "They are going to hit us with night vision equipment. We are going to be fighting blind." As if to confirm his words, the first Russian tank fired an illumination round. It burst overhead, a small sun that turned night into day for 10 seconds. In that light, Ben saw the full scope of what faced them. Not just tanks, but infantry carriers, self-propelled artillery, air defense vehicles. A complete mechanized division, and they were preparing a coordinated assault that would sweep Mesa Ridge clean. "Ghost Actual, this is Reaper 6, Lieutenant Harris's voice, young and scared. "We are combat ineffective, down to 3 tanks in my platoon. Request permission to withdraw." Ben closed his eyes, saw his father's face, the photograph on his office wall, the young colonel who had never retreated. But Jack Hawkins had been killed by his refusal to retreat. Killed covering a withdrawal he would not join. "Permission denied. We hold this position." "But sir." "We hold, Lieutenant. That is an order." The radio went silent. Ben sat in his commander's hatch, feeling the weight of command, the burden of sending men to die. This was what leadership meant. Not speeches or medals, but making the choice that broke your heart because it was the only choice that mattered. Jake spoke quietly. "Dad, we are going to die here, are not we?" "Probably." His son nodded, accepting. "Then I am glad I am here with you. I know I have been angry about a lot of things, but right now I am proud to be your son." The words hit Ben harder than any Russian shell. He reached down, squeezed Jake's shoulder, unable to speak past the sudden constriction in his throat. The ammunition convoy arrived at 0045 hours, 6 trucks racing across the tundra under sporadic Russian fire. Crews swarmed the vehicles, forming human chains to pass ammunition, working with desperate speed. 20 rounds per tank. Not enough for sustained combat, but enough to keep fighting. Ben watched the resupply, watched his exhausted tankers work, and made a decision. He climbed down from Ghost 6, legs stiff from hours in the turret, and walked to his command vehicle. The steel case was secured under his seat, the case he had carried from Fort Hood on pure instinct. Inside was the journal. He unwrapped the plastic with shaking hands, opened the leather cover. His father's handwriting stared up at him, precise and clear, the handwriting of a man who chose his words carefully. "To my son Ben, if you are reading this, I am gone, but I am still here. Every word in this book is a lesson I learned the hard way. Learn from my mistakes, not just my victories. Your father, Jack." Ben turned pages, scanning entries, tactical diagrams, terrain analysis, lessons from 100 engagements. And then, near the end, an entry dated February 25th, 1991, the day before 73 Easting. the day before Jack died. Outnumbered 4-1 tonight. Intelligence says enemy has night vision. We do not. I am scared, Ben, not of dying but of letting my men down. But I realize something. You do not beat fear by ignoring it. You beat it by using it. Fear makes you careful. Careful keeps you alive. Tomorrow I am going to be scared, and I am going to win because of it, not in spite of it. Ben stared at the words. His father had been scared. Jack Hawkins, the hero of 73 Easting, the legend, had been terrified, just like Ben, just like every man who had ever faced combat. The revelation was staggering. He turned to the last page dated February 26, 1991, the day Jack died. The final entry was short, written in a hurried hand. Final entry. If you are reading this, I did not make it. Ben, I need you to know I was not a hero. I was just a man who refused to quit when quitting was easier. The 10th T-72 got me because I stayed to cover my men's retreat. I am not brave. I am stubborn. And sometimes stubborn is enough. I love you, son. Make me proud by living the life I did not get to, Jack. Ben closed the journal, sat in darkness, holding his father's last words, understanding at last. Jack Hawkins had not been fearless. He had been terrified and stubborn and human. He had died not because he was a hero, but because he refused to abandon his men. That was the lesson, not tactics or bravery, just the simple, terrible arithmetic of duty. Ben climbed back into Ghost 6. Jake looked up from the gunner's position, saw something in his father's face. You okay? Ben handed him the journal. Read this. It's from your grandfather. Jake took the journal carefully, reverently. As he read, his expression changed. Surprise, understanding, tears. When he looked up, he was seeing his father for the first time in years. He was scared, terrified, but he did it anyway. That is what courage is. They sat together in the darkness, father and son, bound by the words of a dead man who had loved them both. Outside, the Russian army prepared its assault. But for one moment in the steel confines of Ghost 6, the Hawkins family was whole again. The moment ended when Tom Garrett's voice cut through the intercom. Ben, we have movement. They are coming. Ben pulled himself back to the present, back to the battle. He looked through his optics and saw the Russian army rolling forward, a wall of steel and flame. All stations, this is Ghost Actual. Enemy assault inbound. We are going to hurt them. We are going to make them remember this ridge. And if we die here, we die as the sons of 73 Easting. For your families, for your country, for the man next to you, hold the line. The Russian tanks came on through the darkness, and Mesa Ridge prepared to earn its place in history. The Russian assault came like a tsunami of steel. In the thermal optics, it looked like hell itself had opened and poured forth demons made of metal and fire. T-90 tanks rolled forward in waves, dozens at a time, their formations practiced and precise. Behind them came infantry fighting vehicles, self-propelled artillery, everything a modern army needed to crush opposition. Ben keyed the battalion net, his voice steady despite the terror clawing at his chest. All Ghost elements, weapons free, engage at will, make every shot count. Ghost 6's main gun roared. The turret rocked back with recoil. Through his optics, Ben watched the Sabot round cover 2,000 meters in less than 2 seconds and punch through a T-90's frontal armor. The Russian tank shuddered, stopped, and then exploded as its ammunition cooked off. Splash 1. Jake's voice was mechanical, emotionless. The voice of a man who had shut down everything except the need to survive. Reloading. Tom Garrett moved with the smooth efficiency of decades of practice, pulling a fresh round from the ready rack, sliding it into the breech. The gun locked. Ready. Target tank, 1,200 meters. Jake's hands danced across his controls. Acquired. Fire. Another T-90 died. And another. And another. Ghost 6 was a killing machine, a perfectly synchronized crew working as one organism. But for every Russian tank that died, 2 more appeared. The mathematics were brutal and inexorable. To Ben's left, Ghost 14 took a hit. The Russian round punched through the side armor, through the fuel tanks, through everything. The M1 Abrams transformed into a fireball that reached 30 meters into the night sky. 4 more men gone. 4 more families that would receive folded flags and hollow condolences. All Ghost elements, keep moving. Do not stay static. Shoot and scoot. Ben was implementing his father's tactics now, the lessons from the journal. Make them work for every kill. The American tanks began a deadly dance. Fire 3 rounds, reverse into cover, move 200 meters, pop up in a new position, fire again. The Russians could not predict where the next shot would come from. Their advantage in numbers was partially negated by American mobility and superior gunnery. But partially was not enough. By 0200 hours, Ben had lost 30 tanks, 55 left. The Russians had lost maybe 400, but that still left them with 500 combat-effective vehicles. The math remained brutal. Ghost Actual, this is Reaper 4. Lieutenant Marcus Webb's voice carried the ragged edge of exhaustion. We are down to 8 tanks in my platoon. Request permission to consolidate with your position. Approved. Fall back to Mesa Ridge Central. We are stronger together. The survivors began clustering around Ghost 6, forming a defensive perimeter on the high ground. It was tactically sound, but also desperate. They were giving up mobility for concentrated firepower, betting everything on holding a single position. Jake spoke quietly from the gunner's station. Dad, this is starting to feel like the Alamo. Ben managed a grim smile. The Alamo lost. They held out for 13 days first. The ammunition situation was becoming critical again. 20 rounds per tank had sounded like plenty in the abstract. In the reality of sustained combat, it was disappearing with terrifying speed. Ben did the arithmetic. At current expenditure rates, they would be Winchester, completely out of ammunition, in 90 minutes. He radioed back to Kodiak Base. We need resupply. Urgent. Major Kim's voice came back. Tense. Ben, there is no more ammunition at Kodiak. The convoy you got was everything we had. Next resupply is being flown in from Konus, but it will not arrive for 6 hours minimum. 6 hours. Ben looked at his tactical display at the red symbols representing Russian forces. We do not have 6 hours. Then make them count their shots. Kim paused. Ben, I decoded more of your father's journal, the Korean tactical notes. There is something there, a defensive technique called the Tiger Circle. What is it? Your father wrote that when outnumbered and low on ammunition, Korean tankers would form a tight defensive circle. Each tank covers its neighbor's blind spots. Minimum exposure, maximum mutual support. They called it the Tiger Circle because a cornered tiger fights from all sides at once. Ben looked at the 55 tanks clustered around his position. It was already starting to look like a circle, born of instinct and desperation. Now he understood why. All stations, this is Ghost Actual. New formation. I want a defensive perimeter, 300-meter diameter. Hold down positions facing outward. We are going to make them come to us, and we are going to kill them from every angle. This is the Tiger Circle. This is where we make our stand. The tanks repositioned with practiced efficiency. 55 M1 Abrams tanks in a ring, turrets facing outward like the spines of some great metal hedgehog. Inside the circle were the command vehicles, the medics, the few wounded who could still fight. Outside the circle was death. The Russians recognized the new formation and adapted. They stopped their direct assaults and began a systematic bombardment. Artillery rained down on Mesa Ridge, heavy shells that shook the earth and filled the air with flying rock and shrapnel. They were trying to break the American will before launching a final assault. Inside Ghost 6, the crew endured. Each explosion rattled their teeth. Shrapnel pinged off the armor like deadly hail. The noise was beyond description, beyond endurance. Yet they endured because there was no alternative. Tom Garrett spoke during a brief lull in the shelling. His voice was contemplative, almost philosophical. You know, I was thinking about your daddy, about 73 Easting. We did not win that fight because we were braver than the Iraqis. We won because we were more stubborn. We just refused to quit. That is what Jack taught me. Sometimes the only tactic that matters is refusing to lose. Ben thought about the journal, about his father's final words. Stubborn is enough. Maybe that was the only lesson that mattered. Not tactics or firepower, just the willingness to stand when everyone else would run. Jake was reading the journal again, using a red lens flashlight to preserve his night vision. He stopped at one page, studied it intently. Dad, listen to this, February 24th, 1991. Grandpa Jack wrote about fighting at night with inferior night vision equipment. He said the key was to use the enemy's technology against them. Their infrared spotlights gave away their positions. He would wait for them to illuminate targets, then shoot at the source of the light. Ben leaned down, looked at the page. His father had sketched a tactical diagram showing how to identify enemy tanks by their infrared signatures. It was brilliant in its simplicity. All stations, this is Ghost Actual. The enemy has superior night vision. They are using thermal imagers and IR illuminators. When you see an IR source light up, that is your target. They are showing you where to shoot. Use it. The tactics spread through the battalion like fire. American gunners began watching for the telltale signature of Russian targeting systems activating. When they saw that electromagnetic fingerprint, they fired at it. Russian tankers suddenly found that their technological advantage had become a liability. The kill rate improved. Not enough to turn the tide, but enough to buy time. Precious minutes, precious seconds, each one a gift. At 0330 hours, the artillery barrage stopped. The sudden silence was more terrifying than the noise had been. Ben knew what it meant. The bombardment was over. The final assault was coming. He was right. The Russian tanks came from all sides simultaneously, a coordinated attack designed to overwhelm the American perimeter. 500 tanks converging on 55, nearly 10-to-1 odds. Worse than anything Jack Hawkins had faced. All stations, stand by. Ben's voice carried across the battalion net. They are going to try to break us. Do not let them. Every tank you kill is one less shooting at your brothers. For each other. For home. Hold the line. The Russians closed to 1,000 meters. 800. 500. Point-blank range for tank combat. The night erupted into a maelstrom of fire and steel. Sabot rounds streaking in both directions. High explosive shells detonating against armor. The roar of engines and guns creating a symphony of destruction. Ghost 6 fired continuously. Jake calling targets. Tom loading with machine precision. Harris maneuvering the 70-ton tank with surprising agility. Ben coordinating the defense, his voice hoarse from shouting orders. His body running on adrenaline and terror in equal measure. Splash 1. Reloading. Confirm kill. Reloading. Hit and penetration. Reloading. Jake's litany became a mantra, a prayer, the only thing holding back the darkness. But the Russians kept coming, kept dying, kept coming. For every T-90 that exploded, another took its place. They had accepted that this would be costly. They were willing to pay the price. Ghost 23 exploded. Ghost 37. Ghost 41. The perimeter contracted as tanks died, the circle growing smaller, tighter, more desperate. Ben watched his command die piece by piece and felt each loss like a physical wound. At 0400 hours, a Russian round finally found Ghost 6. The impact was catastrophic. The shell hit the turret at an angle, failed to penetrate, but the kinetic energy transferred through the armor like the fist of an angry god. Ben was thrown against the hatch rim, felt ribs crack, tasted blood. Below him, Jake screamed. The gunner's sight had shattered from the impact, driving fragments into his face. Blood poured from a dozen cuts, turning his face into a mask of red. Ben dropped into the turret, grabbed his son. "Jake, talk to me." His son's eyes were wild with pain and shock. "I cannot see. Dad, I cannot see." Tom was already moving, pulling the first aid kit, applying pressure bandages to Jake's face. "It is okay, boy. It is okay. The cuts are not deep. You are going to be fine." But Jake was done. He could not see to aim, could not fight. Ben made the decision in a heartbeat. "Harris, take Jake to the aid station. Tom, you are on the gun." The old sergeant major looked at Ben for a long moment. "I have not gunned a tank in 30 years. It is like riding a bike. Get on the controls." They made the switch in 30 seconds. Harris pulled Jake from the gunner's seat, helped him out of the tank. Tom slid into the position, his arthritic hands finding controls he had last touched when Ben was a child. His first shot missed by 3 meters. His second was dead center. "Still got it." Tom's voice held grim satisfaction. "Your daddy taught me well." They fought on. The perimeter had shrunk to less than 100 meters in diameter now. 30 tanks left, then 25, then 20. The Russians were paying in blood, but they were winning through sheer attrition. At 0445 hours, Ben's radio crackled. Colonel Volkov's voice, still cultured, still calm despite the carnage. "Captain Hawkins, you have fought magnificently. But this is over. I have 300 tanks left. You have perhaps 20. I offer terms one final time. Surrender now and your men live." Ben looked around the perimeter, looked at the burning wrecks of tanks he had commanded, looked at Tom Garrett, 62 years old, manning a gunner's station because there was no one else. Looked at the sky, beginning to lighten in the east, dawn coming to illuminate the slaughter. He thought about his father's journal, about the last entry, about Jack Hawkins staying behind to cover a retreat he would not join. Colonel Volkov, Ben's voice was steady. I appreciate the offer, but I think I will stay here a while longer. Come take your ridge if you want it. The radio clicked off. For a moment, there was silence. Then Volkov's voice came back and there was something like respect in it. So be it. You are your father's son. I will tell stories of this day. The assault renewed with fresh intensity. The Russians threw everything they had at the shrinking American perimeter. Tank rounds, artillery. Even helicopter gunships appeared as dawn broke, their rockets streaking down like the wrath of God. Ghost 11 exploded, Ghost 18, Ghost 29. The circle contracted to 15 tanks, then 12, then 10. They were dying and there was nothing Ben could do to stop it. At Euro 500 hours, Ghost 6's ammunition finally ran dry. Tom pulled the trigger on an empty gun, the firing mechanism clicking uselessly. That is it, Ben. We are Winchester. Ben sat in his commander's hatch, bleeding from a dozen small wounds, watching the Russian tanks advance for the kill. They knew the Americans were out of ammunition. They were taking their time now, savoring the victory, closing in with the inevitability of death itself. This was how it ended. Not in glory, not in victory, just in an empty gun and an exhausted crew, and the knowledge that they had given everything and it had not been enough. Ben reached for the radio one last time. All stations, this is Ghost Actual. We are out of ammunition. We are out of time. It has been an honor to serve with you. If you can withdraw, withdraw. Save yourselves. This is not an order. This is permission. Go home to your families. Silence on the radio. Then one by one voices responded. Ghost 7, we are staying. Ghost 12, we are staying. Ghost 19, we are staying. Every surviving tank commander. Every crew. They were staying. They were going to die here because that was what soldiers did. They stood with their brothers. Ben felt tears on his face and did not care. He looked at Tom Garrett, at the old man who had served his father and then had spent decades serving the son. Thank you, Tom, for everything. Tom smiled, his weathered face peaceful. Nowhere else I would rather be, Captain. Nowhere else at all. The Russian tanks were 300 meters away, 200, preparing for the final killing blow. Ben closed his eyes, thought about Sarah, about Jake, about the life he would not get to live. He thought about his father, about Jack Hawkins waiting on the other side. Maybe they would finally get to talk. Father and son, man to man. The horizon flashed. For a moment, Ben thought it was Russian artillery. Then he heard the sound. Not the sharp crack of tank guns, but the scream of jet engines. He looked up and saw them. 12 F-35 Lightning fighters, American air power arriving like the cavalry in an old Western. The jets streaked over the battlefield at 500 miles per hour, their bomb bays opening, AGM-65 Maverick missiles dropping free. The missiles were fire and forget, their seekers locking onto the hottest thermal signatures on the battlefield. Russian tank engines. 40 T-90 tanks exploded in the first pass. The jets banked, came around again, their 25mm cannons ripping into the Russian formation, another 30 tanks destroyed or disabled. The Russian advance staggered, broke, pulled back in confusion. Ben grabbed his radio. Kodiak Base, this is Ghost Actual. Who sent the air? Major Kim's voice was jubilant, almost laughing. You did, Ben. Your fight bought enough time. Satellite communications came back online 30 minutes ago. Air Force scrambled everything they had. They are hitting Russian positions all along the front. The F-35s made 3 more passes. By the time they finished, the Russian tank force had been reduced to scattered survivors retreating north. The battle was over. The Americans had held. Ben climbed out of Ghost 6 on legs that barely supported him. Around him, the 10 surviving tanks of his battalion were opening hatches. Crews emerging, looking at each other with the stunned disbelief of men who had expected to die and somehow had not. Tom Garrett climbed out after him, moving like a man twice his age, every joint protesting. He looked at the carnage surrounding him. 75 tanks destroyed, American and Russian mixed together in a sculpture garden of death. He looked at the sky, at the contrails of the departing F-35s. He looked at Ben. Jack would understand. Hell, he is watching right now, proud as anything. Ben could not speak, could not process what had just happened. They had survived. Against impossible odds, against certain death, they had survived. Not all of them, not even most of them, but some. Enough. He walked through this tiger circle, checking on crews, coordinating casualty evacuation, doing the work of command even though every part of him wanted to collapse. He found Lieutenant Webb, the young officer who had wanted to retreat hours ago. Webb's tank had taken 3 hits but was still mobile. The lieutenant saluted, his face streaked with soot and tears. "Sir, I'm sorry. I wanted to run. I almost did. But you stayed. That is what matters." Webb nodded, unable to speak. Ben moved on, checking each tank, each crew, cataloging the living and the dead. He found Jake at the aid station, his face bandaged, his eyes covered. The medic said he would recover his sight, that the damage was temporary. Jake heard Ben's footsteps, turned his head. "Dad? I am here. Did we win?" Ben thought about that question. Thought about the 75 tanks destroyed, the hundreds of men dead, the families that would grieve, the victory that felt like defeat. We held. That is all that matters. We held. Jake reached out blindly. Ben took his son's hand, held it tight. They sat together in silence as the sun rose over Mesa Ridge, as the medics worked, as the living began the hard work of counting the dead. The Russian retreat left a power vacuum that American reinforcements quickly filled. By noon, 300 additional M1 Abrams tanks had arrived from Konus, along with infantry, artillery, air defense. The Alaskan front was secured. The immediate threat was over. But Colonel Volkov was not finished. Intelligence reports came in throughout the day. The Russian commander had not retreated to Russia. Instead, he had repositioned his surviving forces, approximately 200 tanks, to a defensive position in Frost Valley, 30 kilometers north of Mesa Ridge. He was making a stand, daring the Americans to come finish the fight. The tactical situation had reversed. Now the Americans had overwhelming superiority. Now the Russians were the ones outnumbered and cornered. Command wanted to bypass Frost Valley, let air power destroy the Russian holdouts from safety. But Ben had read his father's journal. He understood what Volkov was doing. He is protecting his retreat. If we bypass him, he will attack our supply lines. We have to finish this. The operations officer looked skeptical. "Sir, we can just bomb them. Why risk American lives in an assault?" "Because Volkov is a soldier, not a terrorist. He offered me terms. I offer him the same. A soldier's death or a soldier's surrender. He deserves that choice." The decision went up the chain of command. General Morrison, theater commander, made the call. "Captain Hawkins, you held Mesa Ridge with 55 tanks against 900. I trust your judgment. Take your reinforcements and finish this. But bring our boys home." Ben assembled his force, the 10 surviving tanks from Mesa Ridge, his original command, plus 50 fresh tanks from the reinforcements, plus artillery support and air cover. 60 tanks total against Volkov's 200, still outnumbered, but not hopelessly. He called his commanders together for the briefing. These were not all men he knew. Most were from other battalions, other units. But they knew who he was. They had heard what happened at Mesa Ridge. They looked at him with something between respect and awe. "Gentlemen, we are going to Frost Valley. The enemy commander is Colonel Alexei Volkov. He is a professional. He will not make mistakes. He will make us pay for every meter, but we are going to take that valley because that is what we came here to do." Questions? One of the new captains raised a hand. "Sir, is it true you fought alongside your son at Mesa Ridge?" Ben nodded. "My son Jake was my gunner. He was wounded in action, but he will recover." The captain nodded slowly. "My son is back in Texas, wants to join up. I have been trying to talk him out of it. Maybe I should not." Ben thought about Jake, about the journal, about 3 generations of Hawkins men who had chosen to serve. That is between you and your son. But I can tell you this, I was terrified of losing Jake. I still am. But watching him fight, watching him stand, that was the proudest moment of my life. Whatever you decide, make sure it is about him, not about your fear. The captain nodded again, understanding. The assault on Frost Valley began at 1400 hours. American forces approached from 3 sides, boxing in the Russian position. Artillery softened the defenses. F-35s made precision strikes on Russian artillery and air defense. Then the tanks rolled in. Ben commanded from Go 6, now rearmed and refueled. Tom Garrett was still his gunner. the old man insisting he had one more fight in him. A new driver and loader, young soldiers honored to crew the tank that had held Mesa Ridge. They moved forward with the confidence of survivors, men who had already died once and been given a second chance. Frost Valley was a natural fortress, steep-sided ridges on three sides, narrow entrance on the fourth. Volkov had positioned his tanks to create overlapping fields of fire. Any attacker would be channeled into killing zones. It was a commander's nightmare, unless you had studied the terrain first. Ben had spent hours analyzing satellite imagery, had found what he was looking for, a dry riverbed hidden from direct observation that wound through the valley floor. A covered approach. He led 20 tanks single file through that riverbed, using the terrain to hide their advance. The Russians did not see them until Ghost 6 emerged 500 meters from their defensive line. Too late to reposition, too late to respond effectively. All Ghost elements, fire at will. Ben's voice was calm. We have surprise. Use it. 20 tanks fired simultaneously. 20 Russian tanks died. The American force split, half attacking from the hidden approach, half from the main entrance, creating a crossfire that the Russians could not counter. But Volkov was good. He adapted quickly, repositioned his forces, turned the battle into a brawl. Russian and American tanks mixed together in close combat, sometimes firing at ranges under 100 meters. It was chaos, brutal and primitive, tank warfare at its most vicious. Ghost 6 took multiple hits. None penetrated, but the cumulative damage was mounting. Systems failed, hydraulics leaked. The turret traverse slowed. Tom Garrett worked his gun with increasing difficulty, the damaged systems fighting him. Ben saw a Russian T-90 charging directly at them, its commander clearly intending to ram. Tom could not traverse fast enough to engage. The T-90 was 50 meters away. 30, 20. Harris, reverse, full throttle. Ben grabbed the commander's machine gun, opened fire at the approaching tank. The 50 caliber rounds sparked off the T-90's armor, doing no real damage but forcing the Russian commander to button up, to lose visibility. The T-90 missed Ghost 6 by 3 meters, slewed sideways, exposed its thinner side armor. Tom finally got the gun on target, fired point blank. The Russian tank exploded so close that Ghost 6 was showered with debris. That was too close. Tom's voice shook. Way too close. The battle raged for 2 hours. Gradually, American numbers and firepower began to tell. Russian tanks died faster than they could kill Americans. The perimeter contracted. Volkov's force was being ground down. At 1600 hours, Ben's radio crackled. Volkov's voice, no longer calm, strained with exhaustion and pain. Captain Hawkins, you have won. I request terms. Ben felt no triumph, only tired relief. What terms do you want? Safe passage for my surviving crews. Medical care for wounded. Burial with honor for my dead. Ben thought about the offer. Thought about his father, about honor among warriors. About the rules that made them men instead of monsters. Agreed. Order your tanks to stand down. Crews out with hands visible. I give my word they will be treated with respect. There was a long pause, then Volkov spoke again, his voice soft. Your father killed my father at 73 Easting. I spent my life preparing to avenge him, but now I understand. Some men are worth dying against. Tell your son he fought well, as did you. Thank you, Colonel. You fought well too. The Russian tanks stopped firing. Hatches opened. Crews emerged, hands raised, faces showing the exhaustion and relief of men who had survived against all odds. American tanks held their fire, their commanders disciplined enough to recognize surrender when they saw it. Ben climbed from Ghost 6, walked toward the center of the valley. Volkov emerged from his command tank, a T-14 Armata scarred with hits. The Russian commander was perhaps 50, gray-haired, moving with the stiffness of a wounded man. Blood stained his uniform from a shrapnel wound in his side. They met in the middle of the battlefield, surrounded by burning tanks and the smell of death. Volkov saluted. Ben returned it. You are a worthy opponent, Captain. Jack would understand, as would your father. Ben meant it. Volkov had fought brilliantly with inferior numbers. Another day, another battlefield, he might have won. Volkov reached into his pocket, pulled out a photograph. A young woman, perhaps 20, smiling at the camera. My daughter. She studies medicine at Moscow University. She wants to be a surgeon. I told her I would come home. Now I can. Ben thought about Jake, about Sarah, about all the people waiting for soldiers to come home. I am glad. They stood together in silence, two warriors who understood each other better than most men would understand either of them. Then American medics arrived, began treating the Russian wounded alongside their own. The battle was over. The war, for now, was done. The flight back to Kodiak Base took 3 hours. Ben spent it writing letters to families, the hardest part of command. Each letter the same template. Your son, your husband, your father died with honor. He saved his brothers. He will be remembered. Words that meant everything and nothing. Words that could never bring back the dead. He wrote 75 letters, one for each tank commander lost at Mesa Ridge and Frost Valley. His hand cramped, his eyes burned, but he wrote each one personally, individually, because that was what they deserved. Jake was waiting at Kodiak when Ghost 6 rolled off the transport plane. The bandages were off his face now, revealing red scars that would fade with time. His eyes were clear, seeing again. He stood as Ben approached, came to attention, saluted. Ben returned the salute, then pulled his son into a hug. They stood together, father and son, survivors of something that had tried to destroy them and had failed. I read the rest of the journal. Jake's voice was muffled against Ben's shoulder. Grandpa Jack wrote about coming home from 73 Easting. He said the hard part was not the fighting, it was living with what you had done, living with the men who did not come home. Ben nodded. He was right. How do you do it? How do you carry that? You carry it together. You talk to the men who were there. You remember the ones who were not. You live the life they did not get to live, and you try to be worth their sacrifice. They stood together as the base came alive around them, as crews offloaded equipment, as the machinery of war ground on. But for that moment, they were just a father and son, holding each other up, both of them scarred and both of them stronger for it. That evening, Major Kim found Ben in his temporary quarters. She carried a laptop, her face excited. Ben, you need to see this. She turned the screen toward him. Satellite imagery of the Alaskan front. The Russians are withdrawing, all of them, across the entire border. They are going home. He stared at the screen, at the long columns of vehicles retreating north. What happened? You happened. Mesa Ridge happened. They came here expecting an easy victory. You made it cost too much. 75 American tanks destroyed, but more than 700 Russian. That is a propaganda disaster for Moscow. Their generals are being recalled. The war is over. Ben thought about the price, about the men who would never see home, about the families receiving folded flags, about Volkov sitting in a POW camp wondering if his sacrifice had meant anything. Make sure Volkov knows. Make sure he knows his men's sacrifice ended the war, that they did not die for nothing. Kim nodded and, I will tell him. She paused. The Pentagon is putting you in for the Medal of Honor. You know that, right? Ben shook his head. Give it to the crews. They held the line. I just told them where to point their guns. That is called leadership, Ben. Jack would understand that. She left him alone with his thoughts. Ben sat in the darkness, holding his father's journal, thinking about legacy and sacrifice and the weight of names. Jack Hawkins had died a hero. Ben had lived. He was not sure which required more courage. His phone rang. Sarah's voice, warm and worried and infinitely precious. I saw the news. Are you okay? I am alive. Jake is alive. That is okay enough. I am so proud of you, both of you, but mostly just glad you are coming home. Soon. We still have to process equipment, debrief, do all the paperwork, but soon. Ben, there is something I need to tell you. Jake called me. Before the battle, he asked me about his grandfather, about how Jack really died. I told him the truth. I am sorry. I know you wanted to wait. Ben closed his eyes. What did you tell him? That Jack stayed behind to cover the retreat. That he could have withdrawn but chose to stay. That he did thoughts saving his men. That he was terrified and brave and human. The same things you are. Ben felt something loosen in his chest, some knot that had been tied for decades. Thank you for telling him, for understanding. Come home, Ben. We will be waiting. He hung up, sat in silence, and finally opened his father's journal to the last page. He had read it before, had memorized the words, but now he read them with new understanding. Legacy is not what you inherit. It is what you die defending, and sometimes what you live to protect. His father had died defending his men. Ben had lived defending his son. Both were legacy, both were courage, both were enough. He took out a pen, turned to the first blank page after his father's last entry. He thought for a long moment, then began to write. To my son Jake, if you are reading this, I survived. We survived. I want you to know that fighting beside you was the proudest moment of my life. Not because we won, but because you stood. Because when every instinct screamed to run, you stayed. That is the only courage that matters. Your grandfather taught me that fear is not weakness. Fear is the price of caring. You care about your brothers. You care about your country. You care about doing what is right, even when what is right will kill you. That makes you a warrior. That makes you a man. That makes you a Hawkins. I love you, son. Live the life I did get to live. Make it count, Dad. He closed the journal. Tomorrow he would give it to Jake. Tomorrow they would read it together. Tomorrow they would begin the process of healing. But tonight, Ben Hawkins sat alone in the darkness, and finally, for the first time in 34 years, he felt his father's approval. Felt the weight of legacy transform from burden to gift. Felt the chains of the past release their hold. He was his father's son, but more than that, he was his own man. And that, he realized, was all Jack Hawkins had ever wanted. Outside, the Alaskan night was clear and cold. Stars blazed overhead, the same stars that had shone over 73 Easting, over every battlefield where men had stood and fought and died. Ben looked at them and thought about his father, about Volkov, about all the warriors who had come before. Then he thought about Jake, about the new generation, about the future they had fought to preserve. 3 days later, the survivors gathered for a memorial service on the frozen tundra where they had fought. 75 names were read, 75 lives honored. When the bugler played taps, Ben felt tears on his face and let them fall. After the service, Tom Garrett approached with something wrapped in cloth. Your daddy's captain bars from 73 Easting. Made me promise to give them to you when the time was right. Ben held the worn insignia, feeling the weight of history. Thank you, Tom, for everything, for 34 years of keeping your promise. They embraced, two soldiers bound by the ghost of a man who had died before his time. That evening, Ben sat alone with Jake in their temporary quarters. The silence between them was comfortable now, no longer weighted with unspoken resentments. I have been thinking about what happens next. Jake's voice was careful. After we go home, after all this. Ben waited, sensing his son was working towards something important. I used to think I had to live up to Grandpa Jack. Had to be as brave as you. But that is not it, is it? Jake paused. We are our own men. We make our own choices. We build our own legacies. Ben smiled. When did you get so wise? I had good teachers. Jake looked at his father. I want to stay in the Army. Make it my career, but not because of Grandpa Jack. Because I learned what I am capable of. And I want to keep becoming that man. Ben felt conflicting emotions were inside him. Pride and fear, hope and worry, all tangled together. But he had learned something at Mesa Ridge. You could not protect people from their own choices. You could only stand beside them. Then I support you. Whatever you decide, I am with you. They sat together as darkness settled outside, father and son, both changed by fire, both stronger for it. The awards ceremony took place 2 weeks later at Fort Hood. The president placed the Medal of Honor around Ben's neck. When it was his turn to speak, Ben kept it brief. This medal belongs to the 75 men who died at Mesa Ridge. I just had the privilege of leading them. My father received this same medal 34 years ago. I lived in his shadow, never feeling worthy. But I learned that legacy is not about being as good as those who came before. It is about being the best version of yourself. I wear this medal for them. After the ceremony, they gathered at the memorial wall. Ben placed his Medal of Honor at the base of Jack's name. This is yours, Dad. I just borrowed it for a while. Sarah took his hand, squeezed gently. Jake stood beside them, and for a moment the Hawkins family was whole. The next morning, Ben visited Volkov before his repatriation. They shook hands, two warriors finding peace. I wanted to thank you for treating my men with honor. Volkov's English was impeccable. We lost to worthy opponents. Your daughter will be proud you came home. They talked for an hour, finding understanding. When Volkov left, they saluted each other one final time. In another life, we could have been friends. In this life, we are brothers. We just fought on different sides. Ben drove home as the sun set. Sarah was in the garden. Jake studied inside. Tom was coming for dinner, bringing his endless stories and wisdom. This was legacy. Not medals, but moments like these. Ordinary people choosing to love each other, to stand together. His father's legacy. His legacy. the legacy he would pass to Jake. Ben walked inside, home from war, ready for peace. He heard laughter and music and the sounds of life continuing. The war was over. The battle was won. And for the first time in his life, Captain Benjamin Hawkins felt at peace. 6 months passed. 6 months of debriefings and physical therapy, of nightmares and slow healing. Ben returned to Fort Hood, to the routine of garrison life. But something fundamental had changed. He could not look at his tank crews without seeing the faces of men who had not come home. Could not walk past the motor pool without remembering the smell of burning metal and flesh. Sarah noticed. She always noticed. She found him one night sitting in his office, staring at Jack's journal, a bottle of whiskey on the desk. She did not say anything, just took the bottle, poured it down the sink, and sat beside him until dawn. You cannot save them by drinking yourself to death. Her voice was gentle but firm. They are gone, Ben. You have to let them go. I gave the orders that killed them. You gave the orders that saved hundreds more. There is a difference. He wanted to believe her, wanted to feel the weight lift from his shoulders. But survivor's guilt was not rational. It was a beast that fed on logic and grew stronger in the dark. Jake was struggling too. The scars on his face had healed, but the scars inside remained. He had nightmares where Russian tanks crushed him, where he could not see, could not escape. He woke screaming 3 or 4 times a week. Sarah held him, rocked him like she had when he was a child, whispered that he was safe now, that it was over. But it was not over, not really. War ended on battlefields, but it continued in hearts and minds for years, sometimes forever. Tom Garrett was the only one who seemed unchanged. The 62-year-old sergeant major visited weekly, bringing food and stories and the accumulated wisdom of a man who had survived multiple wars. He sat with Ben and Jake, talked about 73 Easting, about his own struggles with what he had seen and done. Your daddy had nightmares too. Tom's voice was matter of fact, no judgment, just truth. Every night for months after 73 Easting, he would wake up screaming, thinking he was still in that burning tank, watching his crew die. But he learned to live with it, learned that you do not forget the ghosts. You just learn to carry them. How? Jake's voice was desperate, seeking answers that might not exist. You talk about them. You honor them by living the life they did not get to live. You make their sacrifice mean something, and you forgive yourself for surviving. That last part was the hardest. Forgiving yourself. Ben had spent 6 months trying and failing. The Medal of Honor felt like an accusation, not an honor. He had locked it in a drawer, unable to look at it. The call came on a Tuesday morning in May. Major Kim's voice was urgent, professional, carrying news that would change everything. Ben, you need to turn on the news, now. He grabbed the remote, clicked on CNN. The screen showed aerial footage of Alaska, of Frost Valley, of something that made his blood run cold. Russian forces were massing at the border again. Not hundreds of tanks this time, thousands. An entire army group 3 times larger than what Volkov had commanded. The anchor's voice was grave, frightened. Intelligence sources confirm that Russia is preparing a second invasion of Alaska. Military analysts say this force is designed to overwhelm American defenses through sheer numbers. The Pentagon has called up reserves and is deploying additional forces, but sources say it may not be enough. Ben sat frozen, watching columns of Russian armor stretch to the horizon. He thought about Mesa Ridge, about the men who had died there, about the promise he had made to himself that he would never send men into that meat grinder again. His phone rang. General Morrison, theater commander. His voice carried urgency. Captain Hawkins, I need you back in Alaska. You know that terrain. You know how they fight. I need you to command the defense. Sir, I am not fit for command. I can barely sleep through the night without seeing my men burn. Morrison's voice softened. Ben, every commander who has ever sent men to die carries that weight. Your father carried it. I carry it. But we carry it because someone has to. Because the alternative is worse. I need you because you understand what is at stake. Because you have stood in the fire and refused to break. There was a long pause. Ben looked at Jake, who had been listening, whose face showed fear and determination in equal measure. Looked at Sarah, who had heard enough to know what was being asked. Her eyes were wet, but she nodded. When do we leave? 72 hours. And Ben, bring everyone who survived Mesa Ridge. We need men who have already faced the impossible. The reunion happened at Fort Hood the next day. 10 tank commanders gathered in the motor pool, the only survivors of the original 75. They looked older, worn, marked by nightmares and survivor's guilt. But they came, because duty called, because their brothers needed them, because running was not in their nature. Captain Marcus Webb arrived first. He had been promoted after Mesa Ridge, given his Ridge, given his own company, earned a Silver Star. But the confident young officer who had once questioned Ben's caution was gone. In his place stood a man who understood the cost of war, who carried the weight of command with humility. "Sir," Webb's salute was crisp. "I heard they want round two. Count me in." Ben returned the salute, studied the younger man's face. "You do not have to do this, Marcus. You have already given enough." "With respect, sir, I have not given anything close to what the men at Mesa Ridge gave. I am still breathing. That means I still owe them." The others arrived throughout the day. Sergeant Rodriguez, who had lost his entire crew at Mesa Ridge and now commanded a new one. Lieutenant Chen, who had been a loader then and was now a tank commander. Captain Jackson, who walked with a limp from shrapnel wounds that had never healed right. Each one a survivor, each one scarred, each one ready. That evening, they gathered in a conference room for the briefing. Major Kim stood at the front, pulling up satellite imagery that made everyone in the room go silent. "Gentlemen, the Russians are coming with everything they have. 5,000 main battle tanks, 20,000 infantry, artillery, air defense, engineering units. This is not a raid. This is a full-scale invasion." She clicked to the next slide. Aerial view of Tearfall Valley, narrow and steep-sided, a natural choke point. "This is where they will come. Intelligence says they plan to punch through here, drive straight to Anchorage, then fan out to encircle our remaining forces. If they succeed, we lose Alaska. Permanently." "What are our numbers?" Webb's voice was steady, but his hands were clenched. 2,000 tanks total, but most are scattered across defensive positions. We can concentrate 500 at Tearfall Valley. That is it. The room absorbed this. 500 against 5,000. 10-to-1 odds, worse than Mesa Ridge. Ben stood slowly. His shoulder still ached from the wound he had taken months ago. His ribs still hurt when he breathed deeply, but his voice was steady. "I will take Tearfall Valley. Give me the 500 tanks and the Mesa Ridge survivors as my command staff. We will hold." General Morrison, who had been silent until now, spoke. "Ben, you held Mesa Ridge with better odds than this. Are you sure?" Ben thought about his father's journal, about the final entry written before 73 Easting, thought about Tom Garrett's words about the chain of leadership stretching across time, thought about Jake, about Sarah, about all the reasons to say no. Then he thought about the 75 men buried at Arlington, about the debt he could never repay, about the only way to honor their sacrifice. "We held Mesa Ridge because we refused to quit, because we made them pay for every meter, because we fought like men who had nothing left to lose." Ben paused. "We will do it again at Tearfall Valley. Not because we think we can win, because someone has to stand there and we choose to be that someone." Morrison nodded slowly. "Then God be with you, Captain. You deploy in 72 hours. The deployment to Alaska took 3 days. Ben used every hour to prepare his force for what was coming. Not just tactical preparation, but mental. These men needed to understand that they were probably going to die, needed to make peace with that reality so fear would not paralyze them when the moment came. He gathered the 500 tank commanders in a massive hangar at Fort Hood, 500 men who would lead 2,000 soldiers into hell. Some were veterans of Mesa Ridge. Most were not. They looked at him with expressions ranging from confidence to terror. Ben stood on a makeshift stage, no notes, no prepared remarks, just truth. "Gentlemen, I am not going to lie to you. We are going to Tearfall Valley to face 5,000 Russian tanks with 500 of our own. The math says we cannot win. The tactics say we cannot hold. Every reasonable analysis says we are going to die." The hangar was silent. Men shifted uncomfortably. A few looked at the exits. "But I am going to tell you something my father taught me. Something I learned at Mesa Ridge. Reasonable men do not win impossible battles. Stubborn men do. Men who refuse to accept that the math matters more than the will. Men who look at 5,000 enemies and say, 'Bring it on, we are still standing.'" He paused, looking at the faces staring back at him. "You are going to be afraid. I am afraid. Fear is not weakness. Fear is proof you understand what is at stake. But we are going to fight scared. We are going to stand scared. And we are going to make those Russian tankers pay in blood for every meter of our ground they take." A hand went up in the back. A young lieutenant, probably 23, face showing the innocence of someone who had never seen combat. "Sir, what if we break? What if we run?" Ben looked at the young officer, remembered being that age, remembered asking the same question. "Then we break. Then we run. No shame in that. You are human. But before you break, before you run, I want you to look at the man next to you. Look at your gunner, your loader, your driver. They are counting on you, and you are counting on them. That is what keeps us from breaking. Not courage, not training, just love for the men beside us." He let that sink in. At Mesa Ridge, I lost 75 tanks, 75 tank commanders who trusted me. I see their faces every night. I hear their voices. I carry their weight. He touched his chest. And you know what keeps me going? Knowing they stood, knowing they fought until they had nothing left, knowing they died as warriors. That is what I ask of you. Stand until you cannot stand. Fight until you cannot fight. And if you die, die knowing you gave everything. The hangar erupted in applause. Not polite ceremony, but genuine raw emotion. These men understood. They were afraid. They were probably going to die. But they were going to stand anyway because that was what soldiers did. That night, Ben walked the motor pool with Jake and Tom. 3 generations of warriors, moving among the 500 tanks that gleamed under floodlights, inspecting, checking, preparing. Jake had been quiet since the briefing, working through his own fears. "You scared?" Ben asked quietly. "Terrified." Jake's voice cracked. "Dad, I do not want to die. I have my whole life ahead of me. I want to meet someone, get married, have kids. I want all of it." Ben stopped walking, turned to face his son. "I know. I want that for you too, more than anything." "Then why are we doing this? Why are we going back?" Ben thought about how to answer, how to explain duty and sacrifice to someone who had already given so much. Because if we do not, someone else will. Some other father and son, some other group of men who deserve to live just as much as we do. We are doing this because we know how. Because we survived Mesa Ridge and learned its lessons. Because we have a chance, however small, to save lives that would otherwise be lost. Jake nodded slowly, like Grandpa Jack at 73 Easting. "Yeah, like Grandpa Jack." Tom Garrett spoke up, his voice carrying the weight of decades. "And like me. I was not supposed to survive 73 Easting. Jack died so I could live. I spent 34 years trying to earn that gift, trying to be worthy of it." He looked at Ben. "And I raised you, Ben, watched you become a man, watched you become a leader. That is my legacy. That is what Jack gave me." Ben felt his throat tighten. "Tom, you have given more than enough. You do not have to come this time." The old sergeant major smiled. "Ben, I am 62 years old. I have buried 2 wives, 3 brothers, and more friends than I can count. I have lived a full life, a good life, but I am not done yet. I am going to Tearfall Valley. And I am going to stand beside you one more time, for Jack, for the men at Mesa Ridge, for every soldier who ever stood when running made sense." They stood together in silence, 3 men bound by blood and sacrifice, preparing for what might be their last battle. The C-17 Globemasters departed Fort Hood at dawn, 100 transports carrying 500 tanks and 2,000 men north to war. Ben watched Texas disappear beneath the clouds and wondered if he would ever see it again. Jake sat beside him in the cargo bay, reading Jack Hawkins' journal for perhaps the 100th time, finding strength in words written decades ago by a man he had never met. Tom dozed in the loader's position, conserving energy, the wisdom of old soldiers before combat. The flight took 6 hours. When they landed in Alaska, the temperature was 30 below zero. The air burned lungs. The wind cut through uniforms. This was hostile terrain, beautiful and merciless. Ben gathered his command staff as the tanks were offloaded. Captain Webb, Sergeant Rodriguez, Lieutenant Chen, Tom Garrett, and the other Mesa Ridge survivors. These men would lead the defense, would hold their sectors, would stand when standing seemed impossible. "Gentlemen, we have 18 hours before the Russians arrive. We use every minute, dig in, set minefields, pre-register artillery, find every advantage terrain can give us." They dispersed to their assignments, moving with purpose. Veterans who knew that preparation was the difference between life and death. Ben watched them go and felt the weight of command settle on his shoulders like a physical burden. The move to Tearfall Valley took 12 hours. 500 tanks rolling north through the Alaskan wilderness. Tracks chewing up frozen ground, engines bellowing defiance at the empty sky. They arrived at dawn, the valley spreading before them like a wound in the earth. It was beautiful in a harsh way. Steep walls rising 500 feet on either side, a floor perhaps a mile wide, stretching north for 10 miles before opening onto the coastal plain. Perfect terrain for defense. Perfect terrain for slaughter. Ben positioned his force with care. 3 defensive lines, each 200 meters behind the previous, each prepared to fall back in order. The Tiger Circle formation at the rear, the final stand if all else failed. Minefields covering the approaches. Artillery pre-registered on every kill zone. Every advantage he could create from terrain and preparation. But it would not be enough, he knew that. 5,000 tanks could not be stopped by 500, but they could be delayed, they could be hurt, they could be made to pay in blood for every meter of ground. That was the mission. Not victory, just stubborn, bloody delay. The Russians came on the 3rd day. Intelligence had predicted they would wait, consolidate, prepare. But they came early, confident, eager to prove that Mesa Ridge had been a fluke. The horizon turned black with their numbers, a tide of steel that seemed to have no end. Ben stood in Ghost 6's commander hatch, watching them come, and felt an odd calm. This was what he had trained for, what his father had trained for, what every Hawkins before him had faced in their own way. The moment when you stood or ran, when you became who you really were. All stations, this is Ghost Actual. He keyed the battalion net, his voice carrying to 500 tank commanders. They are coming. We knew they would. Our job is simple. Hold this valley. Make them bleed for every meter. Make them remember that Americans do not quit. For your families, for your brothers, for the men who stood at Mesa Ridge and taught us how to be outnumbered. Fix bayonets, gentlemen. Let them come. The Russian advance was methodical, professional. They had learned from Volkov's defeat. No reckless charges, no predictable tactics, just steady, grinding pressure backed by overwhelming firepower. Artillery walked across the American positions, destroying tanks before the main assault even began. Ghost 7 exploded. Ghost 19, Ghost 23. The first defensive line started taking casualties before firing a shot. Ben watched his force bleed and felt each loss like a wound. Return fire. All Ghost elements engage at maximum range. Make them earn this. 500 tanks opened fire simultaneously. The valley filled with thunder. Sabot rounds streaked downrange at supersonic speeds. Depleted uranium penetrators designed to kill anything they touched. The first wave of Russian tanks shattered, dozens dying in seconds. But there were thousands more. They kept coming, kept dying, kept coming. The mathematics were inexorable. For every Russian tank destroyed, the Americans lost one of their own. But the Russians could afford attrition. The Americans could not. The first defensive line held for 2 hours, then broke. Not from cowardice, from simple arithmetic. 100 tanks could not stop 2,000. Ben ordered the fallback, watched his first line retreat in good order to the second position. 100 tanks had become 70. 30 men would never see home. The second line held for 90 minutes. Artillery pounded them. Russian tanks pushed close, fighting at ranges under 1,000 meters. The valley became hell, fire and smoke, and the constant thunder of guns. Men died screaming, tanks exploded. The ground shook with the fury of war. Jake fired methodically from the gunner's position, his face a mask of concentration, refusing to think about what each shot meant. Tom Garrett loaded ammunition with the smooth efficiency of decades, his hands never fumbling, despite the chaos. They were a machine, all 4 men in Ghost 6, operating as a single organism dedicated to survival. Confirmed kill, reloading, hit and penetration, reloading, splash 1, reloading. Jake's mantra was the only constant in the madness. The second line broke. 70 tanks became 40. Ben ordered the retreat to the final position, to the Tiger Circle, to the place where they would make their last stand. Ghost 6 was the last tank to pull back. Ben stayed in his commander's hatch, exposed to fire, directing their retreat, refusing to abandon his position until every tank was clear. A Russian shell hit 10 meters away, showered him with frozen earth and shrapnel. He felt something hot slice across his shoulder but ignored it. Pain could wait. Survival could not. The Tiger Circle formed with practiced efficiency. 40 tanks in a defensive ring, turrets facing outward, ready to sell their lives as dearly as possible. Inside the circle were the wounded, the command vehicles, the medics working frantically to save men who could not be saved. Ben climbed down from Ghost 6, his shoulder bleeding freely now, and walked the perimeter. Checked each tank, each crew, gave orders and encouragement in equal measure. These men were going to die. He needed them to die well. Captain Webb found him at Ghost 12. The young officer's face was streaked with soot and tears. "Sir, we have lost 460 tanks. We have 40 left. They still have over 3,000. We cannot win this." "I know." Ben's voice was calm. "But we can hold until dark. By 6 more hours. That is the mission." "Sir, 6 hours? We will all be dead in 2. Then we better make those 2 hours count." Webb stared at him, then slowly nodded. "Yes, sir." He saluted, turned back to his tank, and Ben watched him go. So young, so brave, so doomed. The final assault began at 1600 hours. 3,000 Russian tanks surrounding 40 Americans. The odds were beyond calculation, beyond sanity. It was not a battle, it was an execution. But the Americans fought anyway, because that was what soldiers did, because their brothers were watching, because surrender was not in their vocabulary. Ghost 6 fired until the barrel glowed red. Jake's accuracy never wavered. Tom loaded until his hands bled. Harris maneuvered the 70-ton tank like a race car, finding every scrap of cover, every angle that offered protection. They were magnificent. And it was not enough. Ghost 14 exploded. Ghost 9, Ghost 21. The circle contracted, grew smaller, tighter. 40 tanks became 30, 30 became 20, 20 became 15. At 1700 hours, Captain Webb's voice came over the radio, urgent, desperate. "Ghost Actual, this is Reaper 6. Russian breakthrough on the east perimeter. They are inside the circle. I am moving to intercept." "Negative, Webb. Hold your position." "Sir, if they flank us, we all die. I can stop them." Ben understood what Webb was saying, understood what the younger man was about to do. "Marcus, do not do this." "Sir, tell my son I made it count. Webb out." Ben watched through his optics as Webb's tank charged the Russian breakthrough. 1 M1 Abrams against 20 T-90s. Webb fired on the move, killed 3, 4, 5. Then a Russian round found him. Webb's tank exploded in a fireball that lit up the valley. But the breakthrough was stopped. The Russians pulled back, regrouped. Webb had bought them 5 more minutes. 5 more minutes of life paid for with his own. Ben felt tears on his face, felt rage and grief and pride all mixed together. He keyed the battalion net, his voice shaking. "All stations, Captain Marcus Webb just gave his life for this unit. For you, do not let it be in vain. Hold the line. Hold the line." The survivors fought with renewed fury. 15 tanks became 12. 12 became 10. 10 became 8. At 1730 hours, Tom Garrett's voice came through the intercom, weak, strained. "Ben, I am hit." Ben looked down. Blood was spreading across Tom's uniform, dark and wet. A piece of shrapnel had punched through a seam in the armor, caught the old sergeant major in the chest. "Tom." Ben dropped into the turret, grabbed the first aid kit. "Tom, stay with me." The old man smiled, blood on his lips. "Ben, listen. I need you to know something. About your daddy. About 73 Easting. Not now. We need to stop the bleeding." Tom grabbed Ben's hand, his grip surprisingly strong. He did not die because he was a hero. He died because he was stubborn, because he refused to leave his men. Just like you, just like Jake. He coughed, more blood. That is the Hawkins gift. That stubborn, beautiful refusal to quit. "You are not dying, Tom. You are not leaving me." "Already gone, Ben. Been gone since 73 Easting. Just took 34 years to catch up." Tom's eyes found Jake in the gunner's seat. "Jake, you listen to me. You are going to survive this. You are going to live. You are going to have sons and tell them about your daddy. About Ben. About how he stood when the world said run." Jake was crying openly now. "Tom, please. Tell Jack." Tom's voice was barely a whisper. "Tell Jack I kept my promise. I kept his boy safe." "You did, Tom." Ben's vision blurred with tears. "You did." The old man smiled once more, then went still. His hand slipped from Ben's, fell to his side. Sergeant Major Tom Garrett, 62 years old, veteran of 3 wars, was gone. Ben held him for a long moment. This man who had been more father than friend, who had carried the weight of a promise for 34 years. Then gently, reverently, he closed Tom's eyes. "Jake, take the loader position." Ben's voice was hollow. We keep fighting. His son climbed down, moved Tom's body as gently as possible, took his place. They fought on because that was what Tom would have wanted, because that was what Hawkins' men did. 8 tanks became 6, 6 became 4, 4 became 3. At 1800 hours, Ghost 6's ammunition finally ran dry. Ben pulled the trigger, heard the empty click, felt despair wash over him. All stations, this is Ghost Actual. We are Winchester. Out of ammunition, out of options. It has been an honor. Silence on the radio. Then 3 voices responded. Ghost 7, Ghost 12, Ghost 19. All that remained. The Russian tanks were 300 meters away. 200. Preparing for the final kill. Ben thought about Sarah, about the life he would not get to live. Thought about Tom, about Webb, about all the men who had died trusting him. He closed his eyes, ready for the end, and heard something impossible. Engines, hundreds of them. American engines from the south. Ben looked through his optics and could not believe what he saw. Tanks. American tanks. 1,000 of them pouring into Tearfall Valley like a steel flood. M1 Abrams tanks from Europe, from Korea, from every base that could spare them. The cavalry had arrived. But not from the air, from the ground. Ghost Actual, this is Thunder 6. We are taking over the fight. You have done enough. Fall back and let us finish this. Ben grabbed his radio. Who is this? Major General Sarah Collins, 3rd Armored Division. We have been driving for 3 days straight. Sorry we are late. The 1,000 American tanks smashed into the Russian flank like the hammer of God. Fresh crews, full ammunition, perfect coordination. The Russians, exhausted from fighting the 3 survivors, were caught completely off guard. The tide turned in minutes. Russian tanks died by the dozens, then by the hundreds. Their formations broke. Their advance stalled, and then, incredibly, they retreated. Ben climbed out of Ghost 6, legs barely supporting him, and watched the impossible happen. They had held, 3 tanks against 3,000, and they had held until help arrived. Jake emerged from the tank, covered in blood and soot and tears. They embraced, father and son, survivors of something that should have killed them. Around them, the valley filled with American tanks, with medics, with the organized chaos of victory. But Ben was looking at Ghost 6, at Tom Garrett's body still inside, at the price they had paid. We won, Dad. Jake's voice was broken. But it does not feel like winning. No? Ben held his son tighter. It never does. The memorial service was held at Arlington National Cemetery 3 weeks later. 460 American tankers had died at Tearfall Valley. Captain Marcus Webb's name was added to the wall. Sergeant Major Tom Garrett's name was added beside Colonel Jack Hawkins. 2 friends finally reunited. Ben stood at attention, Medal of Honor around his neck, and gave the eulogy for Tom. Sergeant Major Garrett served his country for 40 years. He served my father at 73 Easting. He served me at Mesa Ridge in Tearfall Valley. But more than that, he served the idea that some debts can never be repaid, only honored. Tom spent 34 years honoring a promise he made to a dying friend. He raised me when my father could not. He taught me what it meant to be a soldier, to be a man. He died doing what he loved, standing beside his brothers. There is no better death for a warrior. He placed Tom's silver star at the base of the memorial wall, beside Jack's Medal of Honor. 2 warriors, 2 generations, finally at rest. After the ceremony, Ben walked with Jake to a quiet corner of Arlington. They stood beneath an oak tree, the journal in Ben's hands. I am done, Jake. Ben's voice was quiet. I have given everything I can give. It is time for someone else to carry this weight. Jake nodded. I understand. What will you do? Live. Ben smiled. Really live. For Tom, for Webb, for all of them. Your mother and I are going to buy that house in Virginia. I am going to teach at the War College. I am going to be the man they died protecting. And me? Ben looked at his son. That is up to you. You have earned the right to choose your own path. Jake took the journal, held it carefully. I want to stay in, make captain, maybe command a battalion someday, but on my own terms, my own way. Ben felt pride swell in his chest. Your grandfather would understand that. So would Tom. They stood together in silence, then walked back toward the memorial wall where Sarah was waiting. She took Ben's hand, squeezed it, and together the 3 of them walked out of Arlington, toward the future, toward life. 10 years later, Benjamin Hawkins returned to Arlington with his grandson. Major Jake Hawkins had married, had a son, and named him Thomas Garrett Hawkins. Little Tommy was 4 years old, full of questions and energy. "Grandpa, why are there so many names on the wall?" Ben knelt beside his grandson, looked into eyes that held the future of the Hawkins line. Because these men stood when others ran. Because they chose to protect people they had never met. Because they believed something was worth dying for. Were they heroes? Ben thought about that question. Thought about Tom, about Webb, about his father. Thought about fear and courage and the stubborn refusal to quit. They were men, just men, scared and brave and human. They did their duty. That is all any of us can do. Jake appeared, now 34 years old, wearing major's leaves on his uniform. He had commanded at Tearfall Valley, had earned his own medals, had become his own kind of hero. He stood beside Ben, 3 generations of Hawkins men before the memorial wall. "You know, Dad, I was thinking about the journal, about what Grandpa Jack wrote and what you wrote. I think it is time I add my part." Ben smiled. "What will you write?" Jake thought for a moment. "That legacy is not just what you defend or what you protect. It is what you build, what you create, what you pass on." He looked at his son. "Tommy is going to grow up knowing about you and Grandpa Jack and Tom Garrett, but he is also going to know that he gets to choose, that he does not have to be a soldier to be a man." Ben felt tears sting his eyes. Jack would have loved hearing that. So would Tom. They stood together, 4 generations now if you counted Jack's ghost, watching little Tommy play among the headstones, innocent and free. The weight of legacy had transformed into something lighter, something beautiful. Not a burden, a gift. Ben looked at the memorial wall one last time, at the names carved in stone, at the history written in blood and sacrifice. Then he looked at his grandson, at the future running and laughing among the dead, and understood. This was what they had died for, not glory, not victory, just this moment, this child, this future. And it was enough. As they walked out of Arlington, the sun breaking through clouds, Ben thought about the journal, about 3 generations of Hawkins men adding their words to its pages, about the lessons learned in fire and paid for in blood. Legacy is not what you inherit. It is what you die defending, and sometimes what you live to protect, and always what you choose to become. But maybe most importantly, it was what you left behind. The children who would never have to face what you faced. The peace purchased with blood. The future won through sacrifice. Ben took Sarah's hand, watched Jake carry Tommy on his shoulders, and felt the weight finally lift. The ghosts were at peace. The debt was paid. The chain continued, but it continued by choice, by love, by the stubborn, beautiful refusal to let darkness win. 10 years later, Benjamin Hawkins returned to Arlington with his grandson. Major Jake Hawkins had married, had a son, and named him Thomas Garrett Hawkins. Little Tommy was 4 years old, full of questions and energy. "Grandpa, why are there so many names on the wall?" Ben knelt beside his grandson, looked into eyes that held the future of the Hawkins line. Because these men stood when others ran. Because they chose to protect people they had never met. Because they believed something was worth dying for. Were they heroes? Ben thought about that question. Thought about Tom, about Webb, about his father. Thought about fear and courage and the stubborn refusal to quit. They were men, just men, scared and brave and human. They did their duty. That is all any of us can do. Jake appeared, now 34 years old, wearing major's leaves on his uniform. He had commanded at Tearfall Valley, had earned his own medals, had become his own kind of hero. He stood beside Ben, 3 generations of Hawkins men before the memorial wall. "You know, Dad, I was thinking about the journal, about what Grandpa Jack wrote and what you wrote. I think it is time I add my part." Ben smiled. "What will you write?" Jake thought for a moment. "That legacy is not just what you defend or what you protect. It is what you build, what you create, what you pass on." He looked at his son. "Tommy is going to grow up knowing about you and Grandpa Jack and Tom Garrett, but he is also going to know that he gets to choose, that he does not have to be a soldier to be a man." Ben felt tears sting his eyes. Jack would have loved hearing that. So would Tom. They stood together, 4 generations now if you counted Jack's ghost, watching little Tommy play among the headstones, innocent and free. The weight of legacy had transformed into something lighter, something beautiful. Not a burden, a gift. Sarah joined them, her hair now streaked with gray, her face showing the years but also the peace. She had waited through 2 wars, through nightmares and recoveries, and she had never wavered. "Are you ready to go home?" Her voice was gentle. Ben took her hand. I have been ready for 10 years, but I needed to come back one more time to say goodbye properly. To Tom, to all of them, to the boy I was who never knew his father, to the man I became who tried too hard to be his father, to the grandfather I am now who finally understands what legacy really means. He walked to the memorial wall one final time, placed his hand on Jack's name, then on Tom's name beside it, whispered words only the dead could hear. I did it, Dad. I stood. I held. I brought my son home. The chain continues. You can rest now. We all can rest now. Jake came to stand beside him, Tommy on his shoulders. 3 generations, living and thriving, standing where so many had fallen. Ben looked at the memorial one last time, at the names carved in stone, at the history written in blood and sacrifice. Then he looked at his grandson, at the future running and laughing among the dead, and understood. This was what they had died for, not glory, not victory, just this moment, this child, this future. And it was enough. As they walked out of Arlington, the sun breaking through clouds, Ben thought about the journal. About 3 generations of Hawkins men adding their words to its pages, about the lessons learned in fire and paid for in blood. Legacy is not what you inherit. It is what you die defending, and sometimes what you live to protect, and always what you choose to become. But maybe most importantly, it was what you left behind. The children who would never have to face what you faced. The peace purchased with blood. The future won through sacrifice. Ben took Sarah's hand, watched Jake carry Tommy on his shoulders, and felt the weight finally lift. The ghosts were at peace, the debt was paid, the chain continued, but it continued by choice, by love, by the stubborn, beautiful refusal to let darkness win. That evening, at their home in Virginia, Ben sat in his study writing the final entry in Jack's journal. His hand was steady now, no longer shaking with doubt or fear. To whoever reads this next, he wrote, whether you are my grandson Tommy or some distant descendant I will never meet, know this. The Hawkins men have always stood when others ran. We have carried the weight of duty across generations, but we have also learned something more important. We learned that courage is not the absence of fear. It is choosing love over fear, choosing to protect rather than to conquer, choosing to build rather than to destroy. He paused, thinking about how to end it. My father Jack died at 73 Easting, defending his men. I nearly died at Mesa Ridge in Tearfall Valley, defending my son. Your father Jake commanded with honor and brought his men home. This is our legacy, not the battles, not the medals, but the love that made us stand, the bonds that made us strong, the hope that made us human. You do not have to be a soldier. You do not have to fight. But whatever you choose, stand for something. Protect someone. Love fiercely and without reservation. That is the real legacy. That is what makes a Hawkins. He signed it. Benjamin Hawkins, Captain, United States Army, retired. And then added one more line. Husband, father, grandfather, and finally at peace. He closed the journal, placed it on the shelf beside his father's Medal of Honor, beside Tom's Silver Star, beside all the artifacts of war that had defined his life. But now they were just objects, memory, history. The real legacy was in the next room, where Jake was reading to Tommy before bed, where Sarah was making tea, where life continued in all its messy, beautiful, ordinary glory. Captain Benjamin Hawkins, son of Colonel Jack Hawkins, father of Major Jake Hawkins, grandfather of Thomas Garrett Hawkins, walked out of his study and into the rest of his life. The war was over. The battles were won. The legacy was secure. And for the first time in 45 years, Ben Hawkins was finally, completely home.